the data points that Senator Cruz pointed to that you may have in front of you don't account for all of the information that was before me as a judge and the authority that you all, Congress, and your prior confirmation when I was a district judge provided for me to exercise my judgment. And I treated those cases and every case very seriously and imposed a sentence that was sufficient but not greater than necessary to promote the purposes of punishment.
Would it surprise you to learn that Mr. Stewart's a recidivist? He was warrants issued again for his arrest just 3 years after you sentenced him?
Would it surprise me?
Yeah, would it surprise you?
You know, Senator, there is data in the Sentencing Commission and elsewhere that indicates that there are recidivism, serious recidivism issues. And so among the various people that I've sentenced, I'm not surprised that there are people who reoffend, and it is a terrible thing that happens in our system.
Yeah, indeed it is. Let me ask you about the Hawkins case. You and I talked about this yesterday. You've been able to think about it overnight. This is a case where you had an 18-year-old who possessed and distributed hundreds of images of 8-year-olds and 9-year-olds and 10-year-olds, and you gave him, frankly, a slap on the wrist sentence of 3 months.
Senator,
Do you regret it?
I don't remember whether it was distribution or possession. In
It was
the law,
both. Do you regret it?
in the law, there are different crimes that people commit
Judge,
in
you
this
gave him 3
area.
months. My question is, do you regret it or not?
Senator, what I regret is that in a hearing about my qualifications to be a justice on the Supreme Court, we've spent a lot of time focusing on this small subset of my sentences, and I've tried to explain.
You regret that
Many
we're focusing on
times-
your cases? I don't understand.
No. I'm talking about the fact that you're talking about
Child pornography
7
cases?
very serious cases.
I'm glad we agree on that. Don't you think
Some
we should be focusing on
some of which involve conduct that I sentence people to 25, 30 years.
3 months
for-
in this case, Judge. Do you regret it? You haven't answered my question yet. Do you
Senator-
regret this sentence?
Senator, I would have to look at the circumstances. What I'm telling you,
You know the circumstances. We discussed it for half an hour yesterday. There's a 55-page transcript, which I'm sure you've read. You
I
lived
did not-
it.
I
As
did
you've
not-
emphasized to this committee over and over, you've lived it, right? You said that you've been through all of this. You've looked at all of the images. You're the one who's had to endure all of it. You gave him a 3-month sentence. I just wonder if you regret it or if you stand by it. I mean, do you stand by that sentence?
Senator, in every case, I followed what Congress authorized me to do in looking to the best of my ability at all of the various factors that apply, that constrain judges, that give us discretion, but also tell us how to sentence. And I ruled in every case based on all of the relevant factors.
So you don't regret it?
No one case, Senator, can stand in for a judge's
I'm not asking you that.
entire
I'm asking you
record.
if you regret this sentence in this case. And it sounds like the answer is no. But I want to tell you, I regret it. I regret that you gave him only 3 months. Let me read to you what you said about these kinds of cases. And in fact, to this defendant, you said, "Make no mistake, Mr. Hawkins, the children you saw in those pictures were not willing participants in the conduct that you witnessed. They were being forced to commit unspeakable acts of sexual violence for the pleasure of the person who was filming and for the gratification of sick people everywhere, people who apparently have no shred of empathy for what this must be doing to the children who are being abused in this way." You go on. Some of the children you saw in those pictures will never have a normal adult relationship. Some of them will turn to drugs and prostitution and other vices to try to deal emotionally with the pain that results from the torture that they have experienced. And even those who manage to lead a somewhat normal adult life say they live in constant fear of being recognized. Some people are even unable to leave their houses because once those pictures are on the internet, they are there forever. And the victims can't do anything without worrying that every person that they meet has seen them in their most vulnerable state at the most horrible time in their lives. That's your words, pages 34 and 35 of the transcript. Powerful words, Judge. I just don't understand why after saying this and believing this, you could give this guy 3 months in prison when the probation office that we've heard so much about recommended 18 months. Even the probation office recommended 18 months. Do you have anything to add?
No, Senator.
Let me ask you about your policy of not giving enhancements when there are prepubescent children, like there were in the Hawkins case, who are 8, 9, 10 years old, when there are prepubescent children involved. I'm just struggling to understand this. You said it in Hawkins. You said that you weren't going to give him an enhancement. You weren't going to make his sentence any tougher, despite the fact that we had all of these terrible videos that you and I talked about at length yesterday. This is page 38 of the transcript, just so that we're all following along. You said, in your case, I don't feel that it is appropriate necessarily to increase the penalty on the basis of your use of a computer, and we've talked about that, or the number of images or prepubescent victims as the guidelines require, because these circumstances exist in many cases, if not most, and they don't signal an especially heinous or egregious child pornography offense. You said the same thing in the Cooper case just last year. This was an individual, Cooper, who was 30 years old at the time of his sentencing. He pleaded guilty to distributing child pornography. He posted between 3 and 4 dozen images of child exploitation to Tumblr, where it could be accessed publicly. The government said, and I'll quote from the transcript in that case, page 37, when his devices were found, including the computer, within the computer and on an untitled folder were many, many, many videos. The nature of these videos went well beyond mere child pornography. The government says, I don't mean to make light of the content of any child pornography, but rather to say that the content of those videos is on the more egregious or extreme spectrum of the child pornography videos that are encountered in these cases. And yet, when you sentenced him, you said, I'm quoting now from the transcript in Cooper, I'm really reluctant to get into the nature of the porn. And then later, it's very difficult to assess how different Mr. Cooper's images are than those of other similarly situated child pornography defendants, such that I, without going into looking at them, and I'm not an expert, you say. So you say, while I understand the government's arguments, Mr. Miranda, the government's arguments in that regard, I don't find them persuasive from the standpoint of characterizing this as an especially egregious child pornography offense. Help me understand this, Judge. Why is it that what's your policy disagreement with the guidelines treating images, videos, pornographic images that have small children, infants, 7, 8, 9-year-olds? Why won't you give an enhancement for those? Help me understand that.
Thank you, Senator. I'll make 2 responses. First, that's not my policy disagreement. I don't know why you've characterized that in that way.
Well, wait a minute. You say right here in the cases. I mean, this is what I want to make sure that we're talking about the same thing here. This in the Hawkins case, I don't feel that it's appropriate necessarily to increase the penalty on the basis of your use of a computer or the number of images or prepubescent victims. And you say the same thing in Cooper.
Senator, 2 observations. 1, I am sentencing in every case. I have policy disagreements with certain aspects of the operation of the guidelines that I lay out in every case as Congress has required and as the Supreme Court permits in light of my experience, not only as a district judge, but also on the Sentencing Commission, which did a report about the operation of the guidelines. Second, you've read extensively from the government's argument in this case. You've not provided information from the probation office or the defense. And when
I don't have the probation office